about local leadership and the importance of it, both in boosting economic growth, in repairing our social fabric, and now when we're facing a real both cost of living crisis and growth crisis, it's a time when looking locally is clearly going to be a big part of the answer. And I am delighted to have a really excellent cross-party panel representing a range of different spatial levels and different parts of the country to have this discussion about the potential of devolution and the role that it can play to level up. So I'm just going to quickly introduce the panel. To my immediate left, I have Mayor Andy Street, the Mayor of the West Midlands, elected in 2017, re-elected earlier this year. Last year, I don't know where the time's gone, pandemic. Re-elected last year, and who previously had a fantastic career working his way up through John Lewis and ending up as managing director. And Andy clearly been banging the drum at a national level, particularly with this new Conservative leadership, on the importance of devolution to making their growth plan work. So delighted to have Andy. To Andy's left, we have Nicola Richards, the Member of Parliament for West Bromwich East, elected in 2019. I've got that one right. Okay, brilliant. Elected in 2019. One of the seats that the Conservatives took potentially unexpectedly that evening, or at least the sort of seat that came to define that 2019 election, with conversations about Conservatives winning in the so-called Red Wall, sometimes miscellaneously pointed to in the north, when actually it was in the Midlands, in particular the West Midlands, where Conservatives first started winning seats in those places. And indeed, whichever party you're from, some of the seats like West Bromwich East are going to be real battlegrounds in the next election. So what happens there and how things improve is going to be politically key. To my right, Councillor Bridget Jones, the Deputy Leader of Birmingham City Council, elected councillor for Bournemouth and Selly Park in 2011, so a decade working in the council, and the lead within the council, as well as being Deputy Leader, for everything to do with levelling up, and in particular working really closely with Andy as the Regional Mayor on what levelling up needs to look like in the West Midlands, and in particular parts of Birmingham. I'm a Birmingham resident, live about 10 minutes away, really impoverished parts of this city. So you've got the really beautiful Centenary Square outside. A lot of people have been really enjoying some of the fantastic public realm you've got, but not far away, kind of, Digbeth just outside of it in East Birmingham, some of the highest levels of poverty in Europe. And actually that contrast is a really big part of Birmingham's story, the massive opportunity as well as the really big challenges. So delighted to have Bridget on this panel too. And then finally, on the very far left of the panel, possibly not politically, is Councillor Drew Mellor, the Conservative leader of Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole Council. A new-ish unitary, when was the...
3 years.
3 years, 3 years. So kind of really driving forward that case for how unitarisation and large unitary authorities can deliver both value for money but also work across systems in local government, so a really impressive track record there. And Drew himself trained as a chartered accountant and has been running engineering businesses down in his patch for the past few years. So I'm delighted to have this panel with me. I'm going to be quiet there because it's not me that you've come to listen to. I'm going to ask members of my panel to offer some initial thoughts. So what's the role of devolution in supporting the levelling up agenda? Why is it that you've got a lot of people banging on about empowering local leaders? Why does it matter? And then importantly, what do government need to do in order to realise the potential of our local leaders? What funding, what powers are they going to need to give to local areas, whether that's the neighbourhood, the local authority or the region? And Andy, if it's all right, I'll start with you.
Lovely, thank you Adam, and lovely to see everybody here. Now I hope that this is going to be a rare occasion in Conservative Conference where we actually have a lot of cross-party agreement, because the thing I want to say right at the beginning is I do believe this agenda philosophically goes well beyond a party political divide actually, because the really big point, and it's really very straightforward, is that to address the underperformance of some or most of this country outside London, it is best done by putting more responsibility, power and funding into the hands of local leaders. That's the simple point that we are debating. Now, the story is very much one of half done, and I do think we're at a sort of real moment of decision making. Do we go back and potentially therefore not build on the progress that we've made, which I'll summarise in just a minute, or do we go again? Do we take some really big decisions that says, actually, we're really encouraged by what's happened, and no one's going to say it's blemish-free, but basically we're encouraged and we want to do more. And that's the decision facing the government. So if you think of the start of this journey, it was probably 2010, where David Cameron and his team made the probably not particularly insightful observation that we've got a deeply imbalanced country. And you can't have one national policy if you've got such imbalance. If you look at it purely from economic policy terms, and it's also just wrong socially, that opportunities in one part of the country are so much greater in the other. They started with the local enterprise partnerships, and of course the reason I wanted to raise that is they also brought about the enterprise zone. You might call that the father of the investment zone that's now talked about, and we sit in what is arguably the most successful enterprise zone in Britain, where full responsibility for planning what was going to happen over a 25-year period was given. In that case, the level, it didn't matter because it was working very closely with the local authority, and what you've seen is incredible reinvestment in the infrastructure here that then the private sector has then made the most of, a critical point about public and private coming together. And then, of course, we get to 2016 and we get the mayoralties, and you've got formal devolution deals with areas, and we had considerable powers over transport, particularly housing and skills. And again, if you look at this region, I think people would say the investment that we've been able to pull in those three areas, but particularly in transport, and again, it's not by any means finished, but you can see across the region the benefits of that, and we're now investing about 7 times per year what we were back in 2015. Now, I won't go through all of the other things that have happened, because you actually come to the very simple point. It's deeply unfinished business. It's a very imperfect model, where at the moment the role of the mayor is frankly to be the cheerleader and to try to win cash from government. That is not a mature model. I don't believe it works to anyone's political advantage. So my simple point to government is be confident of what's happened, be brave, go again. Actually give us more accountability, which more powers, more cash, and we can talk about where if you want, but the philosophical point is give us that. But in exchange for that, we do not stand on the steps of the town hall or wherever else, always blaming government for the underinvestment in an area. I frankly want to be held accountable for what happens here, rather than always being the cheerleader and passing the buck to central government. The most important thing that will happen under the devolution deal, and I have to say that Bridget's worked with us across parties. I always stress the 7 boroughs that WMCA coming together for particular asks that we might talk about, but the really big decision is there going to be any financial devolution? At the moment, this country remains the most centralised country in the Western world. Only North Korea is more centralised in terms of the proportion of its tax that's taken in the centre of the state. So the real issue here is, are the government going to allow us to retain some tax-raising powers, not new taxes necessarily, but taxes that are raised here, sent to London, and then come back to us in a different form. And the real sophistication, the maturity of the model, is that we actually began to be fully sustainable rather than always playing it through Westminster. That's all I need to say.
Brilliant, thank you very much, Andy, and I'll come back on some of those questions in a moment, but before I do, Nicola, it'd be really good to hear from you. So kind of from a Parliament perspective, so looking from Westminster out, what potential do you see for devolution, for empowering local leaders to help with this mission of levelling up?
Thank you. I always start by saying that Andy made levelling up. Well, Andy was doing levelling up before it was cool, and that is the truth. That we started to see progress in the West Midlands, in the urban West Midlands, before the 2019 election and before levelling up became the priority, and that's because we were able to make, or Andy was able to make decisions and on investment in the area that we haven't seen before. It's one of the reasons that I joined the Conservative Party, because I felt like the region was sort of misunderstood by its politicians. It wasn't a focus of the government, and I felt like we had been left behind. And that is what, you know, all of this was, the levelling up agenda was about. It's about not leaving people behind. It's massive for us. Some of the projects that locally people have talked about for years that they still don't believe that is ever going to happen, because it hasn't yet. Things like the Wednesbury to Brierley Hill Metro, you know, that will happen, and that is only because we have devolution. We have a mayor that understands where the investment needs to go and understands the bigger picture. It also allows for local authorities that aren't able to get to grips with problems through maybe no fault of their own, but don't have the skills or the ability to address some of the major issues. The combined authority working on the higher level across the local boroughs is really important to help with that guidance and insight. And so really, and well, we're with the expert of devolution here. If he wasn't here, I'd just be talking about Andy. But you know, we've got a long way to go. But the way I see it is things are really positive. We've got a government that understands where we need to invest. We've seen that in West Bromwich. We've got £25 million for the town centre through the Towns Fund, and that's just the start of it. We've got Andy's support in that too. And there's lots more that needs to be done. But so far you can see the progress, and you can definitely see it in places like West Bromwich, where our transport connectivity especially is incredible. And there's lots that we need to do to catch up with building houses, attracting more people to the area, creating more jobs. But we've got the good foundations there, and we've got the sort of model to build on it and make it an even greater success. So Andy has our full support on gaining more powers from Whitehall and bringing them down to us locally, where we know how to spend the money and we know how to help local people best.
Brilliant. Thanks very much. Nicola. Bridget, let's turn to you. We've heard quite a lot about the kind of regional combined authority perspective, but of course, devolution is going to work. It's going to need to come to both the combined authority and local authorities, and then down to neighbourhoods as well. So what potential is there for local authority devolution to generate some of the benefits we've discussed?
Sure. So I'm the odd one out here. I'm the red on the panel. Please don't hurt me.
You're very welcome.
You know, it was much quicker getting my security clearance for this conference than it was my own last week. I don't know why I should read into that. But there you go. So I wear many hats, as Adam said. I'm Deputy Leader at Birmingham City Council, Portfolio Lead for Levelling Up on the Combined Authority with Andy, but also here today representing the Core Cities Network, which represents the biggest cities up and down the United Kingdom. Core Cities has spent more than 25 years now arguing the case for cities, pushing the case for devolution. As other panellists have said, the case is very clear for us. We are one of the most economically centralised and decision-making centralised countries in Europe, if not the world, and that shows in the performance of our regional cities. We are lagging so far behind our potential that is demonstrated in other places around the world when it comes to what we could be achieving. And I firmly believe, along with the rest of the panellists, if we can get the right powers into the right places, you can really start to unlock that potential. Why? So these aren't small places we're talking about. So if you take just Birmingham alone, there are 2 EU nation states smaller than my city. There are 22 nations that competed in the Commonwealth Games here in Birmingham last month with smaller populations than Birmingham. You scale that up to the area Andy covers, we're talking a whole lot more. These are areas where in other places of the world it's not unusual for them to have revenue-raising powers or decision-making powers over things that matter to them, and to be able to tailor their offer for the characteristics of their local areas. At Core Cities, we've got 5 interconnected priorities that we're pushing for with government, and having really good talks on that. So the first is driving the economy in the future of urban Britain and really tackling that productivity challenge that we've got. Second is addressing climate change and delivering net zero. You do not deliver net zero for the country without tackling the problems that you've got in cities. Again, because we are so big and we are the economic drivers and over-contributing to carbon. Third is using city diplomacy internationally to extend our UK-wide and global reach and support investment into the UK. Our fourth is accelerating infrastructure, including increasing housing numbers and improving those homes through retrofit for all the obvious reasons. And the fifth is improving urban health and well-being, recognising that that is a real economic issue. And if you look at what I call our unemployment paradox at the moment, where we have record unemployment in our city and yet record job vacancies, a huge number of those people aren't seeking work, aren't able to go into work because of ill health and well-being. So it's a real economic issue for us to tackle that as well. So, as has been said, we're working at a city level with Combined Authority on the Trailblazer Devolution deal. Us and Greater Manchester are the 2 areas that are fighting for, or well, negotiating rather, with government. Still got a different hat on. Well, we are fighting for it actually, because these are really important things just to get down to our city. That we're having really good talks with them about how this is going. But these are things we're really, really passionate about, because we know the difference that if we can get those powers, get that funding down, get that devolution, we know the difference that we can make on the ground to the people who need it so badly. We are working on a cross-party basis. One of our biggest proposals as part of the TDD is around East Birmingham. There's a number of other sites around the West Midlands as well, where we're looking at levelling up or investment zones. For East Birmingham is a key one. It's Labour on our side of the fence in Birmingham. It's Tory on the Solihull side of the fence. So East Birmingham is an area roughly the size of Derby, around about 375,000 people just in East Birmingham alone. It covers Birmingham and Solihull, goes across the great big big invisible Berlin Wall that only councillors can see, that divides up our boroughs, and of course up to the mayoralty as well. So we've been working on a cross-party basis, looking at what can we do for this area. It's off the charts for deprivation, and low skill and low job levels, along with everything else that goes with that. What can we do to really make a difference there? How can we take lots of the public spending that currently happens in the area but clearly isn't delivering results, if you look at its stats, disaggregate that, put it into a pot, do something differently there. The investment zones were announced, one of the less headline-grabbing measures in last week's budget. The investment zones were announced, so a really, really good start. I'm really keen to continue talks around that. But we know there is more we can be doing around public services as well in East Birmingham to really, really make a difference. So that's the overview of what we're trying to do in the West Midlands. As I say, we're negotiating the Trailblazer devolution deal at the moment. Huge opportunity to really make a difference here and hopefully provide a blueprint for other places going forward.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Bridget. And then to round off our introductory remarks, Drew, it'd be good to hear from you, your perspective in a very different part of the country.
Yeah.
What does devolution mean for delivering for your residents?
Yeah, thank you. And firstly, I think I'm actually odd one out because I'm the only one who doesn't live about 10 minutes away. And I think that's relevant because one of the things I'll talk about is actually then looking at the key cities, some of the smaller cities in Birmingham, Manchester, and having we see, and the case has been made really eloquently by everybody about how devolving power to elected members, empowering local leaders works. The next stage is going further with that, isn't it? It's going further throughout the country, and I think the key cities agenda plays a really important part in that, because if you look at some of the fastest growing places in the country, they are key cities, and key cities can do more in that. So you just got ringing endorsement in terms of empowering local leaders. I think there's a blueprint. I think it's proven, and we need to do more about it. I was just going to reflect on two things a bit more sort of locally, as a local government perspective. I think one of the responsibilities we've got is one of the main points around empowering local leaders is because we know our place. But I just want to challenge that sometimes and actually say, well, actually we should know our place, but that's actually a really meaty piece of work. So it's really understanding what is each in our own place narratives, and that's a specific piece of work. So how are we individually competitive, nationally and internationally? And I think every place has a responsibility to spend some time on that. What are our economic drivers, and more increasingly, health inequalities, and how we can really respond to those. So I think the devolution, cuts across all of that economic health and gives us a real opportunity to compete not just nationally but internationally. I think it's the elephant in the room. Are we going to see any more devolution or not? Where is the government on it? I really hope that's not the case. But from a local leader point, it's what actually can we do anyway? And so what we're trying to do is to make sure we're ready to act at really some quite huge scale. Because if we're able to do that locally with the powers that we have got, then we're going to be in a much better place to respond to devolution as and when, and drive that devolution as and when it happens. And just to close briefly, because I'm sure we'd all like to hear from our esteemed panel more, the one potential sort of fly in the ointment about that is that devolution requires trust, doesn't it? Coming out centrally into local, and we're actually in a situation where as local leaders, I think the current phrase treasury orthodoxy is taking away some of the routes to funding and powers for local government. So at the very point we're not trusting local leadership, then we're talking about devolution agenda as well. So I just thought I wanted to raise that effectively, but we're completely committed to it as an area of 500,000 people, similar size to Bristol. We believe we can deliver for our residents through more devolved. We look forward to engaging with the government and the experience of what has worked before as we go forward.
Brilliant, thank you very much, Drew. It's very rare I get reprimanded for having a two West Midlands heavy panel, so I'm taking that as a compliment. That's great. I'm going to abuse my position as chair and ask you a couple of questions. And Andy, I want to start with you. So Drew kind of said the elephant in the room is Devo still going to happen? Is this agenda still front and centre? And I guess you know, there have been some comments today. So Andrea Jenkins, the Education Minister, not thrilled.
I wondered when you'd get to that.
Yeah. So not thrilled about the idea of the education budget being devolved more, and more broadly, you know, we've heard a lot from the government about deregulation, about tax cuts, some stuff about investment zones. Devolution, empowering local leaders, hasn't been front and centre. So are you assured that the government is still committed to this agenda?
So the honest answer to that is I hear the right things from the Prime Minister about this, but I have to see action following through. So let's just be clear on the status of this. So during the campaign for Conservative Party leadership, I had luckily some time with the Prime Minister at the Commonwealth Games at the Alexander Stadium. It was a useful use of the Games. And I had a couple of letter exchanges with her afterwards to tie down the things that she would be committed to. And she did then, to be fair, cover it at the Birmingham hustings as well. She was absolutely categoric that the government remained committed to levelling up, remained committed to devolution, and to the Trailblazer devolution deal that Bridget said there. So we have that absolutely from the Prime Minister. We also have evidence of that in terms of the government is pressing on with the regeneration, what do they call it, the formal bill? I forgot.
Levelling Up and Regeneration
Thank you very
Bill.
much. I can't even remember. The Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill, because that is the thing that is the underpinning. And the clearest sign that they were not committed would be if they had not pushed that forward through parliamentary time, and they have. And then also, you look at who's been put in as the Levelling Up Secretary, Simon Clarke, who all of his sort of social media stuff afterwards is talking about a commitment to broader and deeper devolution. So all the signs there are good. But let's then get to the elephant in the room. Then we have a minister this morning saying, I don't believe in elected mayors, I don't believe we should have those budgets. And this is where the government have got to say, no, Madam Minister, you are wrong. The government policy is to do this. For the last two administrations, while we've been trying to negotiate, and any minister has effectively been able to block it if they didn't like it. And we were in an upswing with the DFE when it was Nadeem Zahawi and we got everything and agreed. We were in a downswing when it was Gavin Williamson. That has got to stop from my party. They're either committed as a government to it or they are not. So if I was the Education Secretary today, or indeed the Chief Whip, I would be taking Andrea Jenkins behind the arras and telling her that is speaking against government policy. And she will implement the devolution deal with the West Midlands that Nadeem has agreed. And I will be following that up. And we cannot have that mixed message from government. Can't be any clearer, Adam.
There we go. I'm sure the whips haven't got anything else to do the next couple of days.
Doing that.
They will. Good stuff. Nicola, from a Westminster perspective, so do you get the sense, you know, Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill still kind of alive, still moving through, as Andy says. Is this high enough up on the government's agenda?
I hope so, is my answer. It's difficult to tell because we're going through such a difficult period in the country in general. We've gone through the leadership election, we then sadly had the passing of the Queen, and so things are not normal. You know, we haven't had the time post-summer recess to get stuck into what's to come. And so, you know, the job of people like me is to make the case to them, same as Andy, and I wouldn't want to get on his wrong side. It is that we've got to do this, because, like I said, local leaders know how best to help the area. You know, getting elected in 2019, we had a whole new group of colleagues elected, and from representing different areas, completely different constituencies, and that means we have a real variety across our party and in government, and it's clearer than ever that one policy just doesn't fit all. Each area has different issues and different and needs different solutions, and so, you know, it's probably a waste of money too if you were to just do the same thing across the board on every issue. So we've got to keep making the case that devolution has been successful and can be even more successful. I certainly think that, you know, things like Police and Crime Commissioner, it should be combined with the Mayor. People think that makes sense locally. I think we have the support of most people in that. Things like that I think we have to do, you know, and crack on with making good changes. And I think the other area that would be interesting to see more devolution. You mentioned education, which is important because we have specific issues with skills in the area. But also health, that you mentioned, health inequalities is massive, and it directly links to employment issues too. And that would be, it's something that loses focus, and COVID is, I thought, might bring more of a, shine more of a spotlight on it, but it sort of hasn't. And it's something that would be good to get a grip on across the West Midlands, because there'll be places like in Birmingham that have very similar issues to those in West Bromwich, and like you said, it directly relates to employment and people's performance in education and the rest of it, and then becomes generational. So lots of local things that we've got to get on top of, and the only way to really do that successfully is to increase devolution and bring the powers down to us.
Brilliant.
Not me.
the royal arse. Bridget, I want to ask you about Labour's approach to devolution, and the reason I want to do that, so we were Onward at Labour Party conference earlier this week, last week, for the first time. One of the reasons we were there is because the cross-party consensus on devolution is fantastic, but even better is a sort of arms race on devolution from our perspective. We want both parties to be trying to outbid each other to be the real champions of localism. That is a good thing in terms of moving forward the ideas. And actually, Lisa Nandy, who spoke on one of our panels, was really clear about particularly ambitions around fiscal devolution, around exploring a recommendation we put forward about devolving a portion of income tax down to metro mayors and to local areas. So I guess I wanted a sense of, what do you think a Labour government nationally would prioritise when it came to devolution?
So levelling up is a phrase that has just captured people across the political spectrum. It's genius. And the devolution agenda goes hand in hand with that. So this is the 8th event that I've done in this sort of policy arena in the last week. 4 of those were at Labour Party conference, 4 of those have been at this conference this week. So both at Labour Party conference, devolution, levelling up sort of went hand in hand and were buzzwords there, and here you can't do one without the other. So I think the commitment is there regardless. So there's a wider policy package that we're looking at. I'm going through my memory to see what I can and can't talk about right now. So I'm slightly involved in crafting Labour's policy for it at the moment.
Oh, very good. No, by all means, be quite open.
You got it here first. So what hasn't been leaked in the Guardian already? So yeah, I mean, Labour is committed to the devolution agenda. We've got to go further with it. We've got to have some standardisation to it. So not all combined authorities are created equally. Andy's powers are different to Andy Burnham's powers, are different to Tracy Braben's powers. Up and down the country, you've got different models working in different ways. Largely for sometimes the local reasons, largely for just historic reasons. And as Andy has said, whoever was in power and what the mood was at the time Devo deal was negotiated. So there's a bit of standardisation there, I think, that is needed. So that we know what we're dealing with. One of the reasons people find it quite hard to engage with different tiers of local government is, frankly, it's a mess. We have different types of council existing at different levels up and down the country, and then combined authorities all themselves being different. That's really hard for investors to engage with, to know who to talk to about what. That's really hard for anyone, essentially, that isn't a local government nerd like me to figure out where they're going. So yeah, definitely an agenda we're committed to, because we can see the potential to be unleashed by doing it, and yeah, more policy will be following.
Excellent, very, very good. I look forward to it. Drew, I want to come to you with a question that's, I guess, sort of about the politics, but also about the policy. One of the unhelpful elements of the devolution agenda at times has been, we're sponsored today by core cities and key cities. Sometimes there's been this cities, towns sort of animosity or rivalry, or a sense that you need to prioritise one or the other as opposed to supporting both. And I guess as a leader of somewhere with large rural patches, urban patches, a real mix spatially, how do you think about, when we're doing devolution, is there a approach that needs to happen across urban and rural? Do we need different things for different places? What do we need to see?
I think it's a really interesting question. I think and I would actually add to that, being a southern town in terms of levelling up. I think it's really important to make the case for levelling up across the country, not just. Although I absolutely understand how in red wall it is particularly needed. So I think we are there's also a confusion here as well, because you've got, where we are, we're talking about 5 local leaders. Local leaders have changed. I've been here leader for 2 years, and I'm the second longest standing leader. So you're going to struggle to get to a position where we are locally, where enough people are going to work together long enough to actually commit with each other to actually then. So there's a case here. So how much is it going to be? Can this be imposed down or not? And then sort of another reflection as well is so we've got a county, but our economic geography is actually much more to the east of where we are rather than our county. So the whole phraseology around county deals is a challenge as well, because where's our economic geography, but it's not in our county. So I just think all I'm saying is that there's much more complexity and much more challenge. So government absolutely have to, and I completely agree with Andy, have a really clear direction, because otherwise local leaders, certainly in my experience, will really struggle to stand up and jump up and down and agree to do this, because it's not turkey voting Christmas, but it is a challenge, and it is putting your head above the parapet to do it, and I believe in it, and I think we need to do it, but we're going to need some really strong leadership from government to support us or impose it.
There we go. Okay, I am going to open it up to the floor. I'll take a cluster of questions and then I'll direct them to some of our panellists. So so I've got a hand up there. I'll take a couple more if there are any. Don't wait until the next round. There we go. I thought there was something up. So I'll take one there, one just back there, and then one in the middle on the floor there. So yeah.
Chris Evans, planner at RPS Group. I was going to ask about devolved planning powers.
Excellent. There we go. Get to the good stuff.
Yeah, because obviously that is one way that power can come down to a combined authority.
Yeah.
But the way I see it in the West Midlands is that whilst reading between the lines, you all seem quite pro devolved planning. Is it the case that smaller authorities around here, such as Solihull, Coventry, are against it because they're worried how it's going to impact them in terms of imposing housing on them and so on? And if they're trying to block your attempts to get devolved planning powers, should you just tell government to give you them?
Excellent. There are some advisors sweating in the room just now. Okay, the second question was just over here. Yeah.
I wanted to ask about how you feel the local authorities would have the capacity to deliver on increased power. So in a world where the whole of the United Kingdom is broken up into smaller areas, you have more power to the state. Will those areas, or do you feel like your area will be able to attract the sort of talent that you would need to be able to deliver those wider powers?
Excellent. Okay, and the final question just there.
Ben Willard from Sheffield. We've seen in Bristol this go the wrong way, with actually a very good engaged mayor become pushed back, and now there's not going to be a future Metro mayor in Bristol. I'd love to hear thoughts on that and how that could be reversed, and is there anything that could be done in terms of delivering the policy centrally that would stop the sort of situations we've seen in Bristol?
Excellent. So I've got 3 questions there. One on planning, and in particular, is there a need to overcome maybe local objections to planning powers? A question on the capacity for local authorities to deliver, even if we got what we're asking for, might it be difficult to get things done? And then a final question about whether we need to maybe impose or direct this model, given what's happened with Bristol more recently. So I'll direct that to some of the panel members. Andy, I'll have to come to you first on the planning question. Should we have, as they do in Greater Manchester, a West Midlands spatial development strategy? And if not, why not?
So, Chris, I don't know who you've been listening to, but we are not doing what you implied we were doing. So there is no seeking of a West Midlands level planning responsibility. It's not in the TDD asks at all. I'll be really clear with you. The 7 local authorities would not support it, and maybe more controversially, I don't believe it is necessary. I actually think that what we have got is working pretty well. So there is a really clear need for the 7 to collaborate, the duty to collaborate, and as a consequence of that, we, unlike the places that do have a spatial planning power, are hitting our housing targets. So there is huge collaboration without the mayor having to formally have that. And I actually think, perversely, if it was put into the hands of the mayor, it would allow some of the local authorities to abdicate their responsibility. And that is a shared view amongst all 7 and me. If we weren't hitting outcomes, then maybe people could challenge us. But as we are, I think we must defend what we're doing. And just before the next question, you come back to me and say, well, you're not producing the employment sites. Let's just have a think about that and look at what has been produced by our system for mass employment sites. So Peddymore, Longbridge, I-10, I-54, Arden Cross, South Coventry Gateway. Huge sites taking big employers. So the evidence is that our system is in providing the employment sites and also the housing sites.
Thank you.
Drew, let me come to you on this question about local authorities and the capacity to deliver. Not any judgment on the kind of model or individuals, but more a recognition that capacity maybe has been constrained in the past decade. Do you think local authorities would be able to take on some of these additional powers if they were granted?
Yeah, I think if you look at what the local authority environment has delivered over the last 2 years, I think you actually see, absolutely what it can deliver. We've got an interesting context on it because effectively we've just also gone through a local government reorganisation, so 3 councils coming into one. And I think that's partly, something else to consider, because while we have a myriad of models, as Bridget was saying, I think that adds a layer of complexity to it. But because we are larger, we have more. It's because we've got more scale. We have much more ability to respond in this space. So I do think there is something about that. I also think there's something about if you look at the attracting the calibre of leadership. If you look at Andy's background and track record, this model has encouraged somebody of that standing. Sorry, there's embarrassing stats out there, but to come into that space, I think that's really, really interesting, really exciting. So yes, local authority can cope. I think it needs to. It's better. It's more able to do that when it's bigger, and you can do that by LGR. You can do that by combined authority, effectively. But it's also fundamental about how we attract and get pathways of talent to come in and lead these endeavours.
Again, well, Birmingham is the largest local government unit in Europe, right? So in terms of that scale, what do you think about this issue of local authority delivery capacity?
So it is a very real one. So funding for local authorities has decreased over the last decade. But different authorities have been hit differently. So it's usually 2%, not every year, but the cap on how much you can put your council tax up by has locked in funding decisions that were made by councils, usually more than a decade ago, as a sort of a chunk of council revenue. So the councils up and down the country in really different places with regards to how much they rely on council tax for revenue raising, how reliant they are on central government grants, and how exposed they are to central government decision making, then impacting on their finances and ability to deliver. So there's a whole question about local government finance that needs unravelling in order to answer that question as to capacity. Going to say probably the most controversial thing I'll say, which is about the political capacity actually to deliver on some of this stuff. So Drew made the point about somebody of Andy's calibre being attracted to this position. We have a real problem in local government. So the vast majority of council leaders are part-time. The average age in my profession is 59. And a huge number of councillors do it on the side of retirement income or do it later in life, simply because the pay that councillors receive is not enough in a lot of areas for councillors to live on full-time or to do as a reasonable job alongside a full-time working week. You've either got to scale down the job so it's possible to do alongside a full-time job, or scale up the pay for particularly council leaders and cabinet members, if you're going to have that political capacity to match what public expectation is.
Or devolve enough power to make the job interesting enough so that other people come into it with different backgrounds as well.
Yes, that's true, but there's definitely a pay and pensions issue. So councillors are banned from receiving a pension, for example, and that puts an awful lot of people off from being able to give up their day job when they're in a position to do the job. So it's not a popular thing to say, but just reforming the way that works, I think would bring a lot more talent to the pool, democratise it, because your ability to give up work to do the job shouldn't stop you from being able to do the job. In a democracy, the only thing that should stop you from being able to get elected is not enough people like your ideas. That should be the only barrier, nothing else. So yeah, slightly controversial one there. But just the final thing on it is, actually it's not all about devolving money, some of it is just devolving powers and freeing us up to do stuff.
Absolutely.
So if I take HMO licensing in Birmingham, we're about to introduce a scheme across half the city to license HMOs, houses of multiple occupation. to drive up standards and tackle some of the endemic issues we've got in that sector. We've had to apply to government to be allowed to do it, jump through a ton of hoops, put a massive legal team on it, go through a ton of consultation steps. We have spent so much money and so much time and so much resource just to use the mechanisms government has put in place. I can't remember which government, God knows when the legislation was made, but it's there anyway. But just to get through those hoops in order to get that power unlocked locally to make the difference we know we need on the ground, you could free up so much capacity locally by just taking those hoops out of the way and just giving us the permission to crack on and do what we know needs doing in our local areas.
There we go. I want to come to this question then about Bristol. So, Bristol, earlier this year, last year, had a referendum to remove their city mayors. You've still confusingly got the Metro Mayor of the West of England, including Bristol. But actually, more broadly, you've got some places like Cumbria where devolution conversations have stalled, partly due to local opposition. So Nicola, I want to ask you, to what degree do you think government should be imposing is going to be a fairly strong word, but at the very least making clear that they want areas to have mayors, and maybe if they're not willing to use a stick, have a much larger carrot to try and encourage more areas to take on mayors? Do you think that's the right approach?
Yeah, I think so. And sometimes we have sort of a debate within the party about devolution because some colleagues are in areas like Manchester where they're not happy about the way things are being run, but that is political, it's not about devolution. And I think it's important that our leadership makes that clear that it's completely fine to disagree with the way things are run, ideas or the way money's spent, but actually the model and what it can achieve is really good. I find that frustrating because we have a really good example of it working here and we want more of it. So I think we have to be really clear about that. And if I can just touch on the bit about attracting talent, but it does kind of hamper your career prospects at the same time because you are limited to where you can go, what you can do, and the timing. And so you've got to find some way of making it more attractive, or we're just going to have lots more. We're going to have an ageing council. As great as that, it's good to have a mixture, and we need to make sure we have a mixture. And I also think that by giving local authorities power and money to deliver projects, like we've had the Towns Fund, it actually meant that in Sandwell, where if you're familiar with local government in this area, you'll know they've had an awful lot of problems. But it actually meant that there was a focus on what they can deliver, and it wasn't good enough. And they've really had to work hard on that, and we're in a better place now. But they do rely on combined authority being a support network as well, and the involvement of local MPs in these projects is really important because we can help check things too. So actually it can be a force for good, and I think it has been in Sandwell and will continue to be.
Brilliant. Let's get some more questions. So I'll take another cluster if you want to put up hands. We're all very shy today. Yeah. So one question just over there, second one up here, and then the third one just back there.
So my name is Anthony Breach. I'm a senior analyst at Centre for Cities, so very much on board with everything we've been hearing on the panel today. I'm interested in this fiscal devolution question. So obviously we, as the panel said, we're in a very centralised fiscal model at the moment. We're not going to get to a kind of ideally much more devolved model tomorrow. But I'm interested in hearing from the panel a little bit about, one, what would be your kind of first step that you would take towards fiscal devolution? And also, second, if you have any ideas of what you think the ideal fiscal mix should be for local government in the UK, like should it be a mix of income taxes and property taxes and consumption taxes? Are there particular levers you want a handle on? Are there particular countries you think are a good example for the UK? Just interested in hearing some of that.
Excellent. Fiscal Devo, where do we start? Where do we want to end up? Second question just up here.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm Rose Marshall, I'm the Associate Director at In Media. I'm interested to hear the panel's views on investment zones and the role that they are going to play in levelling up. Obviously, on the one hand, you'll have much more autonomy, but it is still essentially kind of given policy. And if there are lots of them, are they kind of going to cancel each other out because you're all levelling up at the same time? And is it also pitting you against one another because you're also competing for status and money as a result of that?
Excellent. So investment zones, kind of what are some of the potential pitfalls? And questions about that?
David Godfrey from Kent. It was just really to get the panel's views on the role of the panel.
What's their role? I'm going to start with you, Drew. Investment zones, do you want one down in Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole? What will it look like?
No, we want several. Yeah, and it's really interesting to see how that narrative has changed even over the last week, which I think is because we weren't on the original list, but then now we're encouraged to apply and encouraged to apply for more than one.
Mm-hmm.
So, and absolutely, and I think if you look at some of the things we've been talking about in terms of benefits of devolution, we can get a lot of those through investment zone. So is this now a much more current and with us opportunity for us to really get with this agenda? I think it is, and I think it has to be. So really committed to it. Looking forward to respond at pace to it, and do believe. Because it's a bit going back to the point I was making earlier about if we take responsibility to act at scale in terms of our ambition, what we're trying to do, it means you're ready to then respond to the two opportunities like this. And we've got a number of schemes, we've got a number of resourcing which has enabled us that we've put in over the last couple of years, which means that we've got some really clear ideas about what we want to be doing in that space. So absolutely.
Andy, let me come to you on investment zones. Obviously, big emphasis on streamlining planning, tax incentives. Is that going to do the job in the West Midlands, or what do you want an investment zone to deliver here?
The answer is no. On its own, it won't do the job. Let's tell the story of the enterprise zone here, because I think it actually draws out two of the most critical things. If you just do a tax incentive, and you just do a streamlined planning, and by the way, that's not the key issue at all. There aren't many schemes that aren't going ahead in Birmingham because lack of planning. They're not going ahead because lack of viability. So it's the wrong diagnosis. But if you look at the success here, the critical issue was the duration of the zone. So one word stands out, duration. 25 years. So it was possible to have a business model that borrowed against the income over a long time, that then you invested up front to make the land assembly, the infrastructure, whatever changes there needed to be to the landscape that the private sector then came into. And just think about paradise, as we now call it, that was a library. Some thought it was beautiful, some didn't, and a road system, and an urban motorway underneath it. That took hundreds of millions of pounds to create the beautiful landscape that everyone lauded at the time of the Commonwealth Games. So you have to have long enough, and you have to have a financial model that allows those things to come about. It's very simple. So I'll leave my answer there, because you could say a lot more about it, but that is the fundamental point that I'm not sure is understood in what's being offered just yet.
There we go. So I'm going to come to this fiscal devolution question in a bit. I want to stay on investment zones though. So Bridget, you talked about this potential for an investment zone covering East Birmingham, North Solihull. How are you going to address some of the social challenges that you might have in East Birmingham with an investment zone type approach, or will you need additional things on top of the offer we've seen already?
So the offer that we've had is fantastic, but I do think we need more. So what's on the table at the moment is looking at low tax zones, essentially, across East Birmingham and North Solihull. Great for that. But what you really need to drive the growth that Andy's talked about, that you've seen, and have a look as you're walking around Birmingham, the square outside, the tram, all that amazing public realm and public investment went in to create great conditions for business to thrive, which is then paying itself back in increased business rates. That's the model that we know works. And there is a role for us to do the things to help businesses thrive that they can't do on their own. So in East Birmingham and North Solihull, we've got really poor transport connectivity. They are sandwiched between this amazing city centre and all these opportunities at the airport. But if you live in the middle, trying to get to those job opportunities takes forever and costs evolve. So if we can get transport infrastructure put in, whether it's through this mechanism or whether it's through other funding mechanisms, and we've got ambitions to stick a tram through East Birmingham, along with other measures. If we can address some of the skills issues I talked about earlier, even disaggregating the existing spend that it goes into that area and using it better at a local level could really drive a big difference. So I think the fact we're talking about doing something in East Birmingham, North Solihull is really, really important, because that area needs it quite desperately. But there is more we can be doing. So it's a really good start, but want to build on that to look at what more we can add to that package. Because unless we address the public services side of things, unless we address the public transport side of things, the public realm side of things that are stopping businesses from coming now, we're not going to get the kind of transformation we really need.
Brilliant. Nicola, let me also just give you a chance on investment zones. Clearly the big levelling up policy that's come out of the Truss government so far. Do you think it's ambitious enough, or do you want to see more?
I think it's about what locally you make of it, and I think for me it's more around the help that we need locally in West Bromwich and wider Sandwell is about a narrative, because lower taxes is fine, but you've got to sell another reason for why you would start a business or grow your business in the area. And for me, we're not quite used to, the council aren't quite used to doing that yet, and we haven't really kind of formed the identity and the narrative that we need. So I think it could be a mechanism to do that. For me, I want us to sell that we are, close to HS2. That will bring investment. That we're half an hour away from Birmingham International to the rest of the world. We don't sort of sell Sandwell as that place. And so I think it could be the start of doing that. It's the only thing that's been offered that will enable us to start that sort of conversation. But it's definitely more than just a low tax zone. Like it has to mean a lot more, whether it is about transport. And like I said, we're very lucky. Transport isn't our issue in Sandwell. There are lots of things that are, but it's not that. But I think that it hopefully will enable us to start putting that narrative together and a picture to sell to business, not just locally but abroad too. That it's a great place. It's not expensive to buy a property. It's not expensive to live there, but it's very well connected and has lots of potential.
Andy, let me come to you on these other two questions. So, firstly, on pan-regional partnerships. So we have the Midlands engine here, but you've got a proliferation of these organisations in different parts of the country, often very different forms of governance or differently constituted. And then also on this question of fiscal devolution, where are some of the places you'd start, and where would you like to end up?
Okay, I hope I don't offend anybody now. I don't know who you work for, David, so I'm going to take my life slightly in my hands. I actually think it's pretty irrelevant. The show in town is the WMCA with each of its constituent councils and that level of formal devolution. Now, I'm delighted that there's going to be an East Midlands Combined Authority, because frankly it's been lopsided in the Midlands that we've had one and they've not, so that's brilliant news. I wish Leicester was in it. I think they've made a mistake standing out of it, but that is where the formal devolution occurs. The pan-regional bodies have a responsibility for lobbying. Midlands Connect would be a brilliant example of that, but the formal devolution has to come through the democratic structures. Otherwise, you can't make the case for the cash and the powers that we've been spent the last hour talking about. So I'm sorry to be robust, but I do think that very strongly, and I think it's one of the themes in this is it has to be simplified. There has to be less alternatives, and frankly, it can be a distraction. Now, on the question of fiscal devolution, where do you want to look? Well, first of all, look no further than Scotland. The government has, and consecutive governments actually, have agreed substantial fiscal devolution to Scotland. And frankly, we are saying, let's be the same as that. Just simple taxes like airport passenger duty. Everyone who flies from Scotland, the money is retained in Scotland. Why not the same here? They also have the right to change their income tax rate. So in a sense, the precedent has been established. And then if you said where else as well, I would look to US cities, because I think they have something that's really important to me in how this is done. They have a model where they share the proceeds of their local growth and they put it to a strategy that is agreed, because the underlying problem we have is the lack of certainty. Now, we've heard so much about certainty, haven't we, over the last 7 days in response to what happened a week on Friday ago. And we've got a plan. We call it a plan for growth. We're all signed up to it, but we don't know which bits of it are going to be funded when, because we're there with the begging bowl. So the point is, have our plan. We can be judged on it, be to be held accountable, but then have a source of funding that is in our hands that we can then actually make that plan happen across all the supply side pieces working in tandem. One last thought on it. One of the surprises I had in the fiscal statement, amongst all the others, was the one which actually said that combined authorities would have a single settlement with government at the next spending review. So again, people asked earlier on, is there evidence of where the government's head is? That was in the official document, and I think even you were surprised at it. So there is clear sign that they are up for it.
And the Treasury more broadly, so we've done lots of events on a range of different topics, and they can't really go by without some sort of criticism of Treasury orthodoxy or the Treasury mindset. Do you think they they get devolution, do you think they are going to give you the funds that you need to get the job done, or are there still challenges in the culture and the way the Treasury operates?
I think it was Drew who used the word earlier on, trust. And I think actually it was the critical word that underpins all of this. They sort of say we like devolution where we can see that it works, and sometimes they even say to me, we like it if it's to the right person. And Nicola's point is right, it's the model, not the personality, that they should be backing. So I do not think they yet trust it. They're sort of selective. And that's why I said right at the beginning, this is a sort of fork in the road moment. We're either going to go for it, irrespective of who the personalities are, and you trust the model, and that's what we're fighting for.
There you go. Drew, on fiscal devolution, what sort of funding levers would you like to have at a local level, and where might you want to end up?
I think I'm actually a bit more pessimistic than that, and to say, well, okay, for sure, fiscal devolution, but effectively, we just want government often to get out of the way, to allow us to get on and do what we're committed to do. On all the tightening down of PWRB and what we're able to do with that, massively doesn't, so having 25-year certainty, I absolutely understand that. But if we're in a position where we're being forced to sell a lot of our assets and those things, we actually can use our assets and use our covenant to actually go and have a commitment to 25 years to projects to make them work, and the government aren't allowing us to do it. So I don't think we're close enough to want fiscal devolution. I think we just want to be allowed to get on with with the powers we have already.
Fantastic. And then Bridget, kind of final word to you on fiscal devolution. Are there particular levers you'd like to have at a local authority level now, and where might you want to end up?
So I'd agree with Drew actually. So I went to LGA conference back before the summer, and a week before he resigned from...
It feels like a long time ago.
It really does, it really does, yeah. We had Nadeem Zahawi speak in his role and Michael Gove speak in his role, and 6 days later they both resigned.
No cause and effect.
Whatever happened to Michael Gove? He's been quite quiet, hasn't he, over the last couple of days?
But one of the last things he announced there before stepping down from his DLUC role was that councils were going to move from a 1-year funding agreement with government to a 2-year funding agreement with government. We were going to get 2 years worth of funding knowledge at once rather than 1 year. We set our budgets at the moment based on 1-year settlements with the government, and the way that we have to set our budgets is we have to go out to public consultation based on what we're guessing the budget's going to be, and then sometime around Christmas the government tells us what the budget's actually going to be, and then we have to sort of move the deck chairs around based on the public consultation and what it's actually going to be to make the numbers stack up, and then set a budget in February.
Which
now,
is
that's
2
nuts.
weeks before we have to, effectively publish our budget papers. It's 2 weeks after, we get that settlement, which usually comes on about Christmas Eve.
Yeah, it's madness. You wouldn't run anything else in that way. And I made the point earlier about council tax. I mean, council tax is based on property prices when I was 5 years old. That's how far we're going back. 66% of Birmingham is a band A or B. 80% of Birmingham is a D or below. So just because of accidents of history, the council tax raising revenue in my city is completely different to the mix that you'll have in Bournemouth, to West Brom. Everywhere, just because of historical accidents, has ended up with a totally different funding situation. Labour's already talked about scrapping reforming business rates, but there is something to be done. Certainly, I don't have the solution to council tax, but it's nuts the way it works. Just giving councils that funding horizon to make sensible decisions would be a huge door opener, and removing some of that ring fencing in itself would go such a long way.
I would very happily do another hour on local government finance, but unfortunately we are at time. So I just want to say thank you very much for coming along, and to all of our panellists for the conversations. All that remains is for me to ask you to give them a round of applause. Thank you.